All right, my animation people, let's begin our next tutorial. This will be short, and then I'm going to want you to go back to your shapes project and play with it a little bit more. But today we're going to cover a couple of things. One is to change the speed at which your animations move, right? And then we're going to mess with the transparency, right? Getting them to kind of come in and out almost like a fade. And those are the two things that I'm gonna want you to also practice. So this tutorial on this particular project is gonna be somewhat short, but I wanna make sure that I cover everything I need to cover. So we've covered the motion tween, and we practiced it. All right, so you should be comfortable with the idea down here of making a keyframe, and of course, and this blue transport bar being something that you use a lot, right? Again, this blue transport bar is something that we use, and not only just to navigate the motion or where we're at in the animation, but it also is almost like a crosshair, right? Where we aim and we drop down keyframes or movements. So you should be already familiar with this playhead, and we're going to start with the pacing and timing. All right, so we can actually change the entire pacing with the whole tween span. That's what we call this whole area here. It's a tween span because it spans the whole thing. All right, so if we drag the keyframes, and again, the keyframe could be the beginning or the end, right? Those are the two frames. Think of two cards in a flip book. The beginning and end. If we drag those around, we can actually change the speed. All right. So we're going to be working with the city layer exclusively. In other words, primarily the city layer is what we're going to be using mostly to learn. So if you click over here, and again, I'm going to click over here to this side, right? And we're going to be clicking on the animation. All right. So we're going to be clicking on the keyframe for the end of the cityscape. All right. So we're going to move it over, and then you're going to see a playhead, right? I'm going to click over here. So you can actually see that there's a double arrow facing right and left, right? You get a double arrow. That lets you know that you can either shorten or lengthen the span. And again, if you lengthen it, all right, if you lengthen it out, the movement becomes slower. Okay, the movement is slower. So the opposite, and I'm going to go ahead and stop that right now. The opposite, if you grab it, again, I'm just hovering over. I want you to see that hover part where you have the double arrows facing both ways. And you click and you drag, right? You can drag it shorter, and we're going to go all the way. I want you guys to do this with me right now. Click and drag it to where it goes 60, or drag it back to 60. Then all of a sudden, you're going to see this cityscape move a lot faster. Okay, and I'll hit play. See, now it's faster. Okay, so that is the way you control some pacing and the speed of your animations. All right. So when you reduce it, and again, if you want to practice this, we'll click on here and you can go even shorter, go to 20, and you're going to see if we hit play, it's really fast, right? So let's go ahead and so again, I want you to notice that there's a correlation with that. The less amount of frames, the faster you go through it. You can see in the timeline that the shorter the span, the faster it goes. The longer the span, the longer it goes. All right. So we also want you to see that one of the things that happened here, right, is that because we selected the timeline and we moved it, the city disappears right afterwards. Okay, that's a big deal, right? That's a big deal. So we basically don't have anything afterwards, because if you notice down here in our span, it's all disappeared. So as soon as it hits that last keyframe, boom, the city disappears. So we need to add frames. Okay, we need to add frames. And so basically what we're going to do is we can actually move this again, get the double arrow place it in the front of the city tween, and if we move it over right before everything starts, the city is gone. So now when we go ahead and play it, it comes in a couple of frames afterwards, and again, it's faster, right? Because we've taken out frames. And I'll talk about frames per second, right? We'll talk about the frames per second in a moment. So now that we've covered this part, we do need to finish filling in the back of this tween span, right? And so basically, we need to go ahead and we need to add some frames. Okay, so we're going to add frames here by basically going closer to our end of our tween, and then we're going to hold down Shift. We're going to click, and then we're going to drag all the way across to the end and let go. Oops, I didn't do it correct. Z, Command Z. There it is. Now I did it right. And how do I know I did it right? Because first of all, we're at the end. Here's our cityscape. And then of course, if you look down here, we have our little diamond, right? And that's going to let us know that we have a change in our timeline. So now let's go ahead and grab this area here and drag it all the way to the beginning. And we can play that. All right. And now we went ahead and now the city is there. Once it moves, it stops, right? So once it moves and it hits that one point, right, around 60 frame, and if you didn't get it right, you can always click it and drag it over. There it is. Sometimes you have to play with it. You see the way I'm doing. I'm doing it in real time. I'm not editing it. So sometimes I have to move it over. And you kind of have to click and kind of play with it a little bit. I know it gets frustrating, but just stick with it. All right. So that's how you change your speed. Okay. That's how you change your speed. And of course, you can add different keyframes. You could add them one at a time. You can add keyframes by clicking anywhere, and you can right click. Let me go ahead and undo that. So you can right click the path. And that was a refined motion tween. So we can just basically, that thing. So you can basically click on somewhere and you can basically add a frame. Okay. Insert keyframe here. And we can add some frames by right clicking, but we'll get into that later. So right here, the next thing I want to cover is I want to cover just talking about a little bit about the frame-based selection. All right. Moving the keyframes between spans. So some of you have been playing with this, and I'll show this again. I'll show you this in the shapes in a second. Have been playing with these keyframes left and right. And so what these keyframes do are all they are, again, and I may be saying this over and over again, is those keyframes are points in your timeline where there's a change in your object, right? The object changes every time you move and you see that little keyframe, all right, or that little diamond. So that keyframe isn't necessarily just at the beginning and at the end of your animation. There could be lots of different key changes throughout your whole animation sequence, right? And all of those in fact, they should have a lot of little keyframes. And all those key changes represent changes. I want you to think of, if those of you who drive, I want you to think of them as cross streets. So here you go, you're driving along, and then when you want to turn left or right at an intersection, you drop a keyframe and then you change direction, right? And that's basically what these keyframes do. They basically add some sort of change, whether it be movement or in a minute, we're going to show you how you can actually use opacity and effects on it. But everything is a change. If there's one thing that a key takeaway for today is that keyframes are the change that we're going to be using them. All right. So now that we've finished that, I want to make sure that you can actually change the timing of different things, and we're going to change the timing when we get to the shapes feature. And you can have something go fast and slow now that we know that we have multiple keyframes that we can choose. Okay. But I want you to understand frame rate before we do any of these things, right? One of the things that we need to understand about frame rate is that frame rates come from a time of film, right? Film and video. All right. So older films basically had 24 frames per second. Okay. And the films that were shown in the theater, and they had this cool look to them because it was 24 frames per second. There wasn't a whole lot of information, but it gave people a warmth. And then in the 70s, 80s, video came into play, and that was 30 frames per second, which was faster, which gave you more of a lifelike appearance. Okay, and so basically what ends up happening is that we went even higher to 60 frames per second with HD, right? And all of this takes up space. All right, 60 frames per second means that you had 60, for every second you had a 60 cards, right? For 1 second and 24 frames, you had 24 cards, right? So basically that's what it represented. And so with 60 frames per second, everything can be really sharp and you had all this detail. And that was really used more for sports, right? Because in sports, we want the most lifelike, live sports specifically. You really want the most lifelike visuals on a TV, right? It's a beautiful, beautiful 60 frames per second, and it's fast. It's so beautiful. It's so nice. But films are still using 24 frames per second. Animation sometimes can use 12 frames per second. It just depends on what you want. So we have the option, and if you click over here, if you look over here, the default that Animate gives us is 30 frames per second, which is TV. All right. If you ever thought to yourself, man, a TV show looks different from a movie, that's because a TV show is 30 frames per second and a movie is 24 frames per second. And that is a big difference. Okay. That's a big difference in the way that it works. All right. So if we were going to play with this and basically make this 60 frames per second, right? And I'm going to use 60 frames per second. Watch what happens when I play. It added frames. So your sequence becomes longer. Okay? Your sequence becomes longer. Let's see what happens if we go with a movie. That was HD frames per second. Let's go with old school, 24 frames per second. Right? Now let's see what happens. Mr. What is it? Looks like it's almost the same. It's slightly faster. There's not a huge difference. But there is a big difference in the number of frames. Look down here. Okay, I'm going to go back to 30. Right? And hit enter. And a lot of that changes. Here's your seconds. Here's your actual number of frames. So your number of frames change. Okay, even though your seconds may stay the same, your number of frames will increase, and it just makes sense, right? So there's more detail. There's more. There's definitely a lot more work to do because you're going to have to add some more tweening in. And again, that just also means there's a bigger file, right? More frames per second. I want you to think of stacks and stacks of cards of your flip book, okay? Because it's directly correlated to that. So that is frames per second, okay? And again, that changes your span of how many frames are in between. We would like to work, and we're going to keep it at 30 frames, but you need to understand that for the certification test and also for the test for this unit. All right, so enough of that. Let me go ahead and start talking about, or let me show you how to do animation transparency. So right now you're going to change the cityscape beginning at the beginning keyframe, and you're going to tween it, right? And you're going to basically make it to where it fades in, because right now it's just solid and then it comes all the way in, but I want it to fade in, and it's really simple. So make sure you click on the cityscape. Everybody click on the cityscape. We're in the first keyframe, and then we're going to come over here to our properties panel, our good old properties panel. We're going to go to our color effects, and then we're going to go to our alpha. Okay, color effects, alpha, and then we're going to bring that all the way down, and it looks like our city disappeared, but we see our two lines there. And we also see our motion pass right in the center, right? So we know that it's all going to be completely dark. So let's move our playhead towards right to about 60 where we're at, right? Where our keyframe's at, where our city is supposed to stop. let's click on the stage. I'm going to click in the black area again, just so I know if you don't see anything, any lines or purple lines, you can click on it. You need to see this line to let you know that you're selecting the cityscape. And guess what you're going to do now, right? You're going to head over all the way to the properties panel, go to properties panel. Your alpha should already be in the same spot. If it's not, you can click on it, go to alpha, and we're going to turn this all the way back up. Boom. And just like that, Adobe Animate has recorded the opacity. So now if you go backwards, now hit play, it's a smooth fade in. Boom. Right? Gorgeous. Right? And again, that's how you use those. Now, I'm going to stop right now. I'm going to stop. I'm going to hit pause for a second, and I'm going to let you play with your, or actually I'm going to have you guys open. I'll do this with you for a second. You can hit File, Open Recent, and I'm going to use Moving Shapes. Okay. And again, this is your Moving Shapes tutorial. I'll go to 200. Oops. All right. And so you can actually see what I'm going to do. So now what I want you to do, I'm going to basically do the same thing here. I'm going to go to my ball. Boom. And I'm going to go to Color Effects, hit Alpha, go to 0. All right. Then I'm going to go somewhere over here. And this is probably where I want it to fade in the most. Go back, click on my ball again. Right there, alpha, go to 100. So it fades in as it rolls across. So here you go, just like this. Boom, fade in. Sweet. All right. And again, let's mess with the time. I'm going to want it slower. So I'm going to stretch this out to 160 frames. I'm actually going to select all of them. Let's see if I can hold on shift and select all of the layers and go across, right? So now I made it slower. So now I want you to play with how slow things go. Right now everything's like super slow. But I want you to also play with timing. So I want you to grab a keyframe, shorten it out, right? Hold down shift and then extend it. I don't think this is going to work. Nope. Let me bring it shorter. Hold down shift again. You have to play with it. No, that just redid the length. Again, you have to play with it, get it right. So hold on. There it is. Boom. Now I made the ball faster than everything else. So then I push play. Boom. Everything else is slow, but the ball moves fast. And I want you to have custom speeds for all of them. I'm going to go ahead and stop there. I'm going to let you guys play. I want some different speeds with your balls. And if you noticed, it was fast. My ball was really fast at first, and then it stopped in one place, right? And again, this is all different movement that you should be using, and you should have some fun with it. All right, that's it for me. I want you to practice, and I'll see you on the next tutorial. All right, Mr. Juarez, make sure you hit save on both of these. A save on the working copy, so I'm going to do that. I remembered it. Hit File, Save. Make sure you save that, and then when you're done with your moving shapes, hit File, and then save again. All right, guys, over and out.